Wasn't sure what we would have to discuss on the Thursday episode of On Friar, but some pretty notable topics emerged as Thursday afternoon went on. No Derek today, feeling a little bit under the weather. We are joined instead by our buddy, MLB writer for Sports Illustrated, Ryan Phillips, diehard Padres fan, does a great job for SI, and looking forward to. It's been a little while since we've had Ryan on, picking his brain, especially on a day that brought one in particular notable topic, some ownership news, including a name that we are quite familiar with in San Diego, a newly minted Hall of Fame quarterback. So we will get to that. Again, looking forward to picking Ryan's brain and getting his insight on the pods. First things first, though, thanks to OG's, the sponsor of the On Friar podcast. Appreciate all OG's does for On Friar and the NBC7 Sports Wrap team. If you need a place to catch NBA, NHL, college basketball, March Madness coming soon, OG's a great place to do it. Hit at one of their many locations around San Diego County. Great menu, awesome beer list, and again, shout out to OG's. Thanks for all they do for On Friar. Without further ado, the walk-up music. It is the On Friar podcast brought to you by NBC7. I am Darnay and he is Ryan Phillips. Thanks for coming on, man. I had to hit you up on short notice with Derek unavailable for the pod today, and always enjoy having you on. How you been, man? How you enjoying the spring training Cactus League portion? We'll get into all the big news today, but getting a little bit close to actual baseball here.
Yeah, and the WBC right around the corner, so we're writing about that. You're lucky that you actually texted me to come on when you did, because I was in the middle of writing about the news about the Padres today, so it just worked out perfect. It's like, of course, that's when he's going to text me. So, it's a very interesting time with the WBC, and several really loaded teams. I think this will be a really fun event, and the players seem to still be very bought into it. So it's not the traditional spring training we're all used to, but it also gives some other guys a chance while those guys are off at the World Baseball Classic. Some guys who may not have gotten normal MLB spring training games in. So I think that'll be interesting to follow. Certainly been a crazy offseason, and the season's about to start, and I'm already exhausted. So that's not a great sign.
Yeah. Well, and it just seems to be that way with the Padres. There always seems to be something to talk about, and obviously the ownership piece of it emerged in November, and I think a point of concern, but I think as it's progressed and we've learned about some of these names, and I think just the general distance from which John Seidler has played his part as owner, it would obviously be a completely different feel if it were Peter Seidler deciding, if he was
100%.
Still with us, to make the decision. I think there's part of the fan base that still likes having that Seidler name attached, and there's some sadness seeing that go. But in terms of people that are actually like operating this thing, there's just not that same connection with John Seidler and the brothers as there is with Peter Seidler. And so I found myself, feeling maybe, I don't know if optimistic is the word, excited, very interested to see what plays out, and curious what your reaction was when you saw the news, and interested just kind of, again, to get your insight. I believe it was Dennis Lin of The Athletic with the initial reporting that Drew Brees and Joe Kudla, I believe, from Vuori,
so.
CEO of Vuori, that are heading up a group. We knew there was a couple groups that were in the mix. We just didn't know who they were. That appears to be one of them. Your initial thoughts were what?
I think it's interesting, certainly. I think the Seidlers have made it very clear, and good for them, that they would like somebody who has a tie to San Diego. They've made that. I don't think that will be what it hinges on, but they would welcome, a San Diego person. And just let me get out in front of this. There were people writing, would the Padres move? That's not happening. The Padres are not leaving San Diego. And that has been made clear by a number of people. And I'll just break it down for you right now. The only reason teams move are, one, a lack of fan interest, or two, stadium issues, and the Padres have neither. They are going to be in San Diego for a very long time. And so, but I think having somebody that's invested in San Diego, it's not because of a movement thing. It's just because they know the town and they know the market and they know the fans. And I think that certainly would benefit the new owner. I think you'd have to do a lot less of like earning fans' trust if you had a San Diego, connection. And certainly with Vuori and with Drew Brees, those are two San Diego things. It feels like, even though Drew Brees is an adopted, say as an Indiana alum, I've forgiven him for going to Purdue, and that takes a lot. So, but Drew Brees is around town. You see him. He's one of these guys who has really bought into San Diego in his, since his retirement. And so, that's a good guy to have connected to it. I think he and, that ownership group and the Dan Friedken ownership group certainly get San Diego fans excited because of that connection. And so, certainly both of those seem like very viable routes to go. That may not be who winds up winning the bidding, but I think that it's certainly it's one of those where you look at it and you're like, I wouldn't have thought of this, but it makes sense in the grander scheme.
It does. It does. And I agree. Like, I think as this has gone on and we knew about Joe Lacob, we knew about Jose Feliciano and Dan Friedken. I think for a lot of fans, it was, Dan Friedken's from San Diego. He also seems to have the deepest pockets. And so that's a pretty good combination. A nice little nice 1-2 punch there, $10 billion. I think, again, just the rootedness of Drew Brees, which you explained here. And it does, I feel like it says even more about somebody's connection when, a lot of guys play in a city, so they live in the city, but he left San Diego a long time ago. That was early in his NFL career, and he's still come here, had his family here during the offseason, working out, training here, obviously now retired. And then, I don't know, I haven't had a great opportunity to do much research on Joe Kudla, obviously Vuori being a North County brand. I don't know the specifics of where he is from and his background.
He went to USD. I don't know where he's from, but yeah, he built it in Carlsbad, and it's still in This isn't one of those things where they built the business and then, hopped out of town. It's still here in Carlsbad. And so I think that just the fact that has been the case, this has become a large, $5 billion brand that is still in San Diego because that's where it started. And I think that says a lot, quite frankly. And it just seems like, it's a surprise thing. And I've always known that that's a San Diego brand. And you've seen it kind of grow all over town where they're everywhere now. And it's become this big, worldwide thing. But, it's one of those San Diego companies. And so it's not shocking that the owner of that would want to get involved. And so clearly he believes in San Diego and what it has to offer. And I think what's interesting here too, is I think a lot of people are surprised that when the team went on the market, everyone, I think some people that I was talking to around San Diego were kind of like, well, what are they even going to get for it? There's some debt, there's this or whatever. And now it's going to be the highest price sale in Major League history. It's going to top the Mets, which was $2.3 billion that Steve Cohen paid. It's easily going to go past that. I think somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion, which will be the biggest in history. Two teams were recently on the market and were pulled off: the Washington Nationals and Minnesota Twins. This isn't just about Major League teams being valued more. It's about a very attractive product in San Diego. And I think that it's not surprising that this has become, you've heard, there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of bidders. There's a lot of, very attractive, groups coming forward to buy this. And when you look at what the Padres have become to San Diego, how important they are, the one downside of the Padres has always been the TV deal or lack thereof. Well, if the new CBA is going to pool all TV revenue, which seems like the way we're headed by everybody that I talk to, that is eliminated. Your TV market will not matter. And to a certain degree, it won't matter. You are going to get at least close to what everybody else is getting. That eliminates any negatives you have being in this market. And so I think that's why it's become so attractive so quickly.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think, and you wrote again, Padres sale expected to break MLB record right now on SI.com. So definitely check that out. Just posted a couple hours ago. And that was one of the interesting, aspects to all of this, like the timing of when they decide to sell. There's also the belief that, and maybe the salary cap doesn't go through. But the belief that if that were to go through, that would help team valuations. And so when the Sidlers, do they hold on and wait for the value to peak? Do they just decide, okay, we're done, it's time to move on and not worry about that sort of thing? And obviously the TV contract, that's going to factor into all that as well. And so I don't know, it's one thing that's kind of been in the back of my mind, but since we started hearing about some of these groups, and we found out that the initial bids that are apparently in 5 of them now, I think there's that one mystery group now. Now I believe, I always struggle with his name, the writer from Sportico. He was on with Ben and Woods and said there was a group from Korea that apparently is interested as well.
That's what we're all, since he said that, that's kind of been the whisper in the background, that there's an Asian, presumed to be the Korean group that's interested. I don't know if they made a bid. I'm not breaking any news here. I don't know, but that's kind of been assumed that it might be them.
Yeah. And now we're flying down this path. And it looks like, could it happen before opening day, early after the season? Which is kind of crazy to sort of wrap your head around, but that's the reality of the situation that they're in. And this thing has progressed very quickly and could continue to progress at a pretty rapid pace.
Yeah, and I think that's surprising. I think some people asked me this offseason, after the Sidlers decided to sell, I had people initially be like, what are your thoughts? And, and then about December, when it started bubbling up that there were some interested parties, somebody asked me, when do you think this will get done? I was like, I don't know, mid-season at the earliest, because these things take forever to get worked out or whatever. There has been so much interest in this that they have kicked it into overdrive. And I think that the Sidlers are just happy to pass it on. They're going to make a lot of money from what their initial outlay was. They no longer have to worry about, the financing the debt from the sale and all of that stuff. They can just move on. And it's clear, you can count the amount of times John Sidler's been on camera since Peter passed on one hand. Is it one? He's just not,
maybe
because, and he's just not that guy. He's not Peter. And he's not this guy who wants to be on camera, who wants to be involved, who wants all these things. And so I think that this for them is it's not a burden. I think that's too strong a word, but it's a lot for them. And they're not the passionate, they don't have the passion that John did. And so the fact that they've got this interest, they're probably just like, let's get this down the road. We were hoping for X amount of money. We're probably going to get close to that. I mean, all the reports I've seen have said that they were hoping for 3. They're going to get somewhere between, a 500 million stretch in there. I know it's a lot to us, but they're going to get somewhere in there and probably be very happy with where they end up. And if they can do it fast and get out from under it and walk away and hand it off to an ownership group that people in San Diego like, they'll be looked at very positively, I think.
What I'm curious about with this group is, with these other guys, Dan Friedken, that have popped up, even I think Mohammed Mansour, when he bought SDFC, find out about the name, you Google it, you can very easily find a projected net worth. Joe Kudla doesn't seem to be one of those guys. Now, you mentioned Vuori is worth a recent evaluation of $5.5 billion. But personal net worth, I don't know what that looks like for him. I'm not entirely sure with Drew Brees. We know athletes, for a lot of us, incredibly wealthy, but then there's ownership money, which is a very different story. And so as we're evaluating these different ownership groups, knowing where Dan Friedken is, knowing that Jose Feliciano is at 3.5 or something like that, Joe Lacob 2.5 or 3, that's what I don't know about this group, and that's what I'm curious about. And what does a $5+ billion asset company, how does that translate to personal wealth, the ability to not only purchase this team, then to be able to bankroll it the way obviously fans hope that they would?
Well, and I think that one thing that gets underreported about this is there's usually more people involved. And it's Drew Brees gets the headlines, but he's probably putting in very little of his own money into this, just like Manny Machado with, SDFC and those things. It's a face for the ownership group. So it's not like he's putting, pushing all his chips in on the Padres. But there usually are other owners that these guys know who are maybe not as wealthy, but you collect a couple of them and it starts to beef up the overall value. But I think also, how much you're worth matters, but how much you're worth plus how much the team makes a year is what really matters. And, the Spanoses were one of the, quote unquote, poorest NFL owners, but they start the year with $300 million from a TV contract from the NFL and go from there, and so that's what really matters. And if the new TV system is going to help that, then you may not have to be a $10 billion guy to be able to invest fully in this, to the level that the Padres were investing before you stepped in the door. I don't know what his net worth is. And again, a lot of these things are estimated. It depends on the day of the week of the stock market and all of that stuff. But yeah, I think that if you're going to make a bid for 2.5 to $3 billion, you've got cash, and because that they're going to vet that heavily. And I think also MLB is very wary of, over leveraged owners after some of the guys they've been through the past, 25 years, very wary of selling, of allowing a sale to go to somebody who can't, continue to fund a product, because it makes the rest of them look bad. And they definitely don't like that.
No. And I look, the Padres have kind of been at the forefront of that, like pushing maybe beyond their means a little bit. And fans have gotten accustomed to that. And I think, hopefully that's one thing the ownership, as much as you can vet that, get a feel for the team's investment, not just in purchasing the club, but continuing to invest in the roster, in the stadium and the fan base, and trying to, bring a winner to San Diego. And you make a good point. I mean, the Seidlers, what was their piece of the franchise? It was about a quarter, right? It wasn't
initially. Yeah. They just had enough to buy 50, a controlling interest, essentially.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I mean, do you have, it's a stupid thing to be like, who do you think's going to, buy the club? But you mentioned Friedken. Like, does one of these names intrigue you? Or especially if if you take off your MLB writer for Sports Illustrated hat and put on your Padres hat, and with a beer in hand at Petco Park, what's tugging at you?
Yeah, I think given what Dan Friedken did at Everton, which had a horrible financial situation, and turned that around, and is universally praised for the work he has done at Everton, turning that around, doing some creative accounting stuff to get the debt into turning it into assets, and turning into equity. I mean, and being able to turn that around, get them financially stable very quickly, and now to the point where their outlay and spending is the most they've ever had. That I look at that and I say, and that guy's from San Diego. He owns 2 sports franchises with Roma and Everton. He knows what he's doing. He looked at trying to bring a hockey team to Houston because he lives in Texas. But he is San Diego guy. I mean, all of that appeals to me, and he's worth, $10 billion. Now, not all of that 10 billion is going to be focused on the Padres. So I think that people need to also understand that these valuations, that doesn't mean he's going to put that into the team. It's just what he's overall worth and where his capital can go. So I would say, yeah, he's probably the guy that I look at and say, I would really love that, because that's a guy who knows San Diego, is from San Diego. This other group that popped up today seems interesting. Again, San Diego based, all of that. I know Joe Lacob really wants it. Everybody I've talked to said he's pursuing it heavily. I don't know if he has the money to compete with some of these other offers, though. That doesn't mean that he couldn't, do what the Seidlers did and invest heavily in the team. He's certainly had success with the Warriors. So I don't know. I know he was trying to be first in the door in a lot of ways and was really pushing and he's tried before. He's tried with several other MLB teams that we know of. He had a standing offer to buy the A's. He really looked into buying the Angels at one point. Way back in the day, he looked at the Dodgers when they were a distressed asset. I do think that he is really enthusiastic about it. But I think the Friedken connection to San Diego, being a San Diego native and seeing already what he's done with other franchises, really is the guy. That's the guy that I look at and say, yeah, I think that one makes the most sense out of all of them.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of fans agree as well. I've cooled on Joe Lacob a little bit, and maybe as far-fetched as it might have been, kind of the relocation stuff was even just like a sniff of that was enough to make me be
I think
let's maybe go in
to
a
allay
different
everyone's
direction.
fears, here's two things. Rob Manfred is not letting another team go back to Oakland anytime soon. That's number one. Number two, Joe Lacob moved his team, the Warriors, out of Oakland into San Francisco. So
true.
I understand there's that thing, and he talked about building a stadium there and everything, but no worries in that regard for me.
And, some Dodger connections with Jose Feliciano.
Yeah.
I believe his HQ is in Santa Monica, and then kind of the other half of the Chelsea ownership group is kind of the Guggenheim, et cetera, crew. And so whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it sounds like they're trying to kind of buy each other out. So maybe he hates those guys and thus hates the Dodgers. That'd be great. But I think also people are like, well, he's buddy with all these Dodger owners. Do we really like that? How much does that really matter? I'm sure when he's
we need another Dodger aligned family running the franchise.
Any final thoughts on this before, in the next, few minutes or so, get into some actual spring training baseball topics on the day? Manny Machado homer twice and hit a grand slam.
I just think that San Diego fans should feel good about this process so far. And I think that, when it starts, when you put your team up for sale, you don't know how it's going to go. I mean, the CBA is ending. There's a really good chance we miss games next year. And despite all of that uncertainty, people are like, we want to buy this team. And part of that is due, to the fans for showing up. I mean, it sold out 72 games out of 81 last year. If there wasn't this overwhelming fan support for the team, I don't think there'd be as much excitement for it. Yeah, it's got a nice stadium on the water, but if that stadium's empty, it's not as attractive an asset as it is now. And I'd say that too about the way San Diego fans showed up for the Padres. That's the reason there's an MLS team here too. And so I think that, Padres fans have to understand that they created a lot of this value. Now, I'm sorry, it's not going to get paid back to you, but it is part of why this team is so attractive and why this is going to be such a massive sale price. And I just think that, pat yourself on the back, Padres fans. You've made this a very attractive team, and to the point where it's going to be the most expensive sale in Major League Baseball history.
I don't know offhand who the Dominican plays in their first WBC game, but if you're the starting pitcher and you're going to see Manny Machado and you just see him hit a couple tanks today, you got to be maybe a little bit nervous.
Pitch him low and away. It's yeah, I mean, Manny looked locked in today, and he's one of those guys who I think really likes the WBC and has always really embraced it. I mean, a lot of guys have, to be fair, and seeing him be locked in, he usually is a slow spring guy, very slow spring guy. Sometimes has a very slow start to the season, kind of gets lined up, gets everything in. But he, turned on those pitches today and looked like midseason form. And I think he's ready to go. And that Dominican team is absolutely loaded. The Dominicans, the Venezuelan team is loaded. Japan, the USA, this is the best team USA's ever sent. The Mexican in Mexico is really good. This is going to be a fun WBC. It's a shame that only, that there are more teams that should make the quarterfinals than are slots available this year. And so I've just been doing the research on it, and it's going to be great. And yeah, if you're facing Manny, I or anyone in that lineup, quite frankly, I would run for cover.
Also, like Fernando Tatis Jr. finally being in the WBC, I can't wait to see what that's like and what version of him. And I mean, there's going to be so much adrenaline coursing through him. And the fun factor for that could be off the charts.
Yeah, he's made for TV, man. And that's going to be great. And it'll be great for, a chance to reintroduce himself to people who don't get to see him every day as well. So
maybe Mason Miller hits 105 on the gun, pitching for his country.
We'll see. I mean, we saw what happened when he got jacked up against the Cubs in the postseason last year and turned in what were, in my opinion, two of the most dominant innings in the history of playoff baseball. But yeah, I think it's the rosters are so loaded. It's going to be so much fun. I am really looking forward to it this time around.
There's there's been so much talk about the WBC because 2023 was such a disaster and it happened to be a WBC year. And so now there's so much angst about the WBC. How is it going to impact the Padres? And so I'm are we reading too much into 2023 and the impact of the WBC on that? Because it's not like they got off to a bad start and then hit their
No.
stride and were awesome at any point. It was a terrible year until about mid-September, and at that point it was too late. And so part of me does wonder if that's a little bit overblown. Now I think them being a little bit more mindful of it, really like making sure the guys that are left behind that are still here during the WBC, maybe step into more, and step into larger roles, and figuring out ways to kind of ease the guys back once they're here and to kind of give them a lift. Stammen has talked about Manny feeling like you just really, you drop off so much going from WBC high stakes games to the Cactus League. But there's also part of me that's like, does it really matter? Is that all a little bit overblown? Because it was just a bad year, period.
Well, and I think that year was interesting because you had a very big piece coming in who had never been there before, in Xander Bogaerts, who is going to be, with that contract, you're automatically a big part of that locker room. You had a manager in Bob Melvin who I think struggles with star players. I mean, I think that has been proven at his stops, is when he has a group of young, scrappy guys, he is great with it. But, having to police those big personalities has been a struggle for him. And then you had, Juan Soto, the uncertainty about long-term, what's going to happen there. No Fernando Tatis Jr. I mean, I think it was just so many things fed into that. I don't think it was a World Baseball Classic. Maybe it would have helped if they were all together for the whole spring. Maybe that does help. And maybe it's a little bit different. I don't think it changes the outcome of the season. That team did not have what it needed and did not have what it took to win a World Series. I don't think that a couple more weeks together in spring training would have changed that. But yeah, I think there's some effects of it. It helps to have a group of guys who already know each other. I mean, most of this team has been together and was together at the end of last season. And therefore, I think it's going to be, easier for them to sort of coalesce than it would have been if this is like, well, you got a new starting right fielder you got to work in, and then you got a new number one starter, and then you've also got a new catcher you got to work with. I mean, the continuity is kind of there from the end of last season. So I think that this will be much easier than that situation.
And I think a much, again, on paper, deeper lineup. I think the potential is there that, if a few guys, if Tatis, Machado, and Bogaerts are struggling for some reason out of the gates, maybe it's because of WBC. You have Merrill, you have potentially Castellanos, Andujar, Gavin Sheets, Cronenwell. You got guys Laureano that could pick them up. And you did not have that in 2023.
You didn't have it last year for a lot of the year either. So, it's.
And, and it is interesting too, like, Jackson Merrill, and he didn't want to say if he got an invite, but made it pretty clear that he wanted to be here and focus on the Padres, especially after an injury-riddled season. Nick Castellanos, him coming in, obviously his relationship with Manny is big. They're gone. Does he assert himself a little bit more? It seems like they really want Jackson Merrill to assert himself. And so his leadership track, I'm curious what that looks like this season.
Well, you and I have been in that locker room. Jackson is not shy. He's not a shy guy who's sitting in his locker room, afraid of. He's a guy who has the personality to be a leader. I don't think that'll be difficult for him to step up. Plus, you've got Joe Musgrove back and contributing. I think that's going to be huge for this team. Michael King coming back and making the statement that he wants to be in San Diego. He could have gone out and got that money from anywhere, but he wanted to be in San Diego. Makes that deal. I think that there's guys already in that locker room who will help that. If Nick Castellanos wants to step up, he gets the head nod from someone like Joe Musgrove, who everybody already trusts. I mean, I think that that's easier. It's not going to be the Wild West of these guys trying to figure it out. There are guys in that room who are going to foster that. And that's very important, and also those guys are in charge of integrating the new guys all around the table, not just guys who are veterans or who've had, success in the big leagues before. So I'm not as worried, I think, as you could be. As far as Jackson Merrill goes, though, I mean, I think that guy is, Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado weren't on the team. That guy's the face of the franchise, and I think he has the personality to handle that. And I understand why he didn't want to play in the WBC, given what happened last year. He knows what he's capable of. And last year was not that. And he was injured, he had the concussion, he had a hamstring injury. He was never quite right. I think it was 3 IL stints, just never really got in sync. You'd see it for like a week and then it would go away. I get him Yeah, I get him really wanting to focus on getting this off to a great start.
I need to get you out, but I wanted your thoughts on the lineup because I feel like the lineup has been one of the more interesting topics since we're not living in a Tatis one Arise two world anymore. Thank goodness. Uh, um, but there is discussion about, okay, what is the optimal lineup for this group? Where is the place we put Fernando Tatis Jr.? Manny's made it clear he likes having Tatis behind him. Um, I guess my question to you is, why wouldn't you use Machado 2, Tatis 3 as the starting point and then build from there? What's the argument against that?
I like that arrangement as well. But I'm just not sure how everybody else slots into it. I think
Mm.
Merrill would be a great two. But I think that he's probably going to wind up being in that scenario 4 or 5. I do think the Padres need to be conscious of the right left thing because they got burned by that a lot last year, where they'd have 3 lefties in a row. And guess what? The fire throwing lefty out of the bullpen is going to come and strike all 3 of them out. And then you go back to the guy who has a changeup that's hard for righties to hit. I mean, it's they really need to balance that. It doesn't have to be an alternating every guy, but I don't think you should have more than 2 in a row at any point. And so that's the balance there, is how do you figure out where to go? Because it seems like, they seem to like Xander Bogaerts up top, which is interesting. This team really does not have an ideal leadoff hitter. It really doesn't. And so they didn't
Now,
really.
could you flip flop essentially Bogarts and Merrill based on matchups?
You could certainly, and honestly, I favor that. I don't think you have to be monolithic with your lineup all season. I think lefty, righty, whatever, change things. Now, maybe keep guys who are in there every day in a certain rhythm. Like Merrill hits before Manny, Manny hits before Tatis, like whatever. But you can move them around a little bit, and you can also, occasionally change things up. It's 162 games. You're not gonna have the same lineup the whole season, and so I think that they really do have to figure out a rhythm that works for their 2 biggest stars, certainly, but that also doesn't compromise them late in games when you're getting lefty righty, you're getting beat lefty righty. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though, especially because they're trying to start to like plot it out right now, and then all the guys are going to leave. So yeah, it's not exactly ideal timing, but I would assume that they've got some ideas in their head, and they're going to just have to play it out at the beginning of the season, see what happens.
Fascinated to see what it ends up
Really,
looking like,
yeah.
and just glad that it's not going to look like it did last year, despite all the evidence we were seeing. It just did not change.
By the way, if you follow me on social media, I'm really sorry for beating that horse as long as I did, but my goodness.
Yeah, that was rough. Ryan, I appreciate you doing this, especially on short notice. Always enjoy catching up. Again, check out his piece on SI.com tonight about the Padres sale. Thanks, dude. Look forward to catching up again. Hopefully do it in person, maybe with a beer in hand or something. But again, really appreciate your time as always.
Anytime, man. Thanks.